All right. So this is adjustments. Okay. So thank you for anyone who's joining me live. This is the inaugural episode of the Million Movie Project Presents. So it's a little different than what I normally do. Um, if you are here for the updates on my books or movies or anything that I'm doing, the next episode of that is going to be on February 2nd. So this is a separate thing that I'm getting started. I've been looking forward to doing for a while. And it's going to be a review series for TV and movies, and generally things I like, maybe some other subjects. I'm here in my pillow blanket nest because I think more shows should probably be broadcast from pillows and blankets. I can't think if I'm not comfortable. So that's why I shoot on a bed. Um, so for my first episode of this new venture, I want to do a deep dive into the TNT series Animal Kingdom, and it's going to be full of spoilers. So if you haven't seen the show or you haven't finished the show, it's available on Amazon Prime currently, and I'm guessing the TNT app as well. I'm not super sure about that, but just FYI, this is not about what I'm doing. This is going to be about a review of a show. So since I said that, now I'll say this. Um, Intro to me, if you're here for the first time, I do have another series that's exactly like this, but different in nature, because I am a writer, a filmmaker, artist. I do lots of different things. And I currently have a book that's close to being finished. And I've got a documentary on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, about Buster Keaton. And you can check that out for free. It's there in full. And that is what I normally am talking about. And I will have some really good updates and things about that. And this time, I'm starting off with a review, which I'm super excited to get to. It's called the the Million Movie Project, which is something I've been working on. I guess now this is the 16th year, going to the 16th year. And it was basically kind of before social media, right in the beginning of it, but I didn't really take it to that level, where it's a database where I review personally, like the movies I watch, and I'm starting a section for shows. And this is the first time I've really made a big public showing of it. I have a blog by the same name on Tumblr, but that's kind of meh. And I wanted to try to use it for some sort of public purpose. So when I finished up this series, Animal Kingdom, I figured that would be an excellent place to start. I finished it actually a couple of months ago, and I've been really looking forward to getting to talk about it. It was just the holidays and everything kind of delayed being able to get to it. So now we're here. And just again, there's going to be tons of spoilers. I'm going to spoil the entire thing. So, if you want to check this out later, after you finish the show or started the show, watched it, whatever, all my past videos are on my YouTube channel as well, and this will be there shortly after it. I finish up here. I'm gonna do my best to keep things as brief as possible. My normal shows are usually run about an hour, but I usually only have like about 5 or 6 lines of notes, and I've got 2 pages of notes for this. So I'm going to go as fast as I can and try to cover as much ground as I can, because I think that because I'm so, obsessed with storytelling, and when it comes to TV, like the long format storytelling is really my favorite type of storytelling, I guess. And this might be, for all the television that I've seen and coming up to this point over the years, I think that this could possibly be the best show that I have ever seen. And I was really surprised to find out that not a lot of people were talking about it or even really knew about it. And I actually came into it really late. I found it on Amazon just looking for things to watch. I remembered hearing about it ambiently, seeing its commercials and things, but not really, it wasn't really clicking. So I saw the entire thing late last year. And I was so worried about spoiling it because it was so good that I wouldn't go online and look at anything while I was watching it. And the last about 6 episodes of the last season were behind a paywall initially, and I just like refused to look at anything. I knew something big was coming and I wasn't about to spoil it for myself, and I managed not to. So I'm really excited to get to talk to about it for the first time. And I'm kind of disappointed that it doesn't really have a fandom. I haven't really been able to find anything, anybody talking about it too much. And I think this is the kind of thing that could really use, and enjoy, the people who make gift sets and things like that. And I think it would be really fun for a lot of people to get into, other than just the fact that the quality is super excellent. And it probably has the best through line I've ever seen in a show, which is how, for entirely different reasons throughout the entire series, um, all of the sons try and drown their nephew in the pool at different times. And I think that, I've never actually seen anything do anything that consistently. It's not supposed to be funny, and it's not funny in the moment. But I really, I think it was a really great through line, really compelling, and that's probably what makes the show so great, is how compelling and interesting and contextual it is. And it also lets you out, gives you a long leash as an audience member. They don't spoon feed you every little detail to make sure you understand where things are going. It took me a while to realize, probably right before the last season begun, and the whole time I'm watching this, I have, the mental conspiracy board going on, where I'm just like pointing at, making connections and stuff. So I would end up figuring something out before the reveal. I realized that right before that it was revealed in the flashbacks, I realized who the people that Smurf and Jay were going to visit, who they were. And I realized that Jake was Craig's dad, and who all the dads were and how that all fit together. Like, that all was clicking with me right before I would end up seeing it, and I got super excited about that. And then the idea that there was this entire storyline that was sort of a hidden storyline that went in parallel with the entire series, and just you wouldn't even really necessarily notice that it was going on, except for, you get used to the idea in shows where there's always just, big plot holes, problems, storylines that just drop off, people that just disappear. But, from the beginning, I could kind of tell that this was better than that, that they really seemed to know what they were doing and weren't just adding on and adding on. So if something didn't add up for me, it kind of made me think, this is on purpose. We're supposed to be paying attention in a certain way, and and connecting some dots here about the relationships between people, and that's kind of a big part of it. So I'll get into that in a minute. But like I said, 2 pages of notes, so I'm gonna go as fast as I can about this. When I first came into it, it looked to me like it was gonna be like kind of a TV version of Point Break, the movie. And that appealed to me. I was like, oh, well, this sounds really good. But I also didn't know if it was going to be like gory or, gross, or something you didn't really, I wasn't that into. Like, I don't mind violence, but like gore is like ew, and I don't want it to get too because organized crime stuff is really not my thing per se. I'm pretty much into everything except probably romantic comedy. That's so boring. But or high drama where it's just like feelings and quiet whispering and things like that. So that's not my thing. But I found out right away that I was into this show by probably 3 or 4 episodes in, because at first you start off like any show where you're not really connected to any of the characters. You really don't care about them. You're not there yet, but you go very quickly between, these people are awful and not redeemable, and to where you get to like, these are the best characters I've ever seen. And that all happens in the first season. By the time you see how the first season wraps up, then it's like, okay, you got me. I'm in here. I'm about this. And I love just the fact that it let you figure things out on your own. And it had, at the same time as having this kind of I don't really know for sure that they did this, but I'm seeing a trend towards this, what I've kind of been calling umbrella storytelling here lately, where it seems like there are certain shows that have the whole idea in mind before they go into production. Like, they know everything that's going to happen from beginning to end. Because the standard of television has always been, well, even going back, to the radio days, to the theater, vaudeville and all this, you know, television and movies, they're not meant to entertain you. They're not meant to inform you or make you feel feelings. They are a product for whoever's producing them, and are meant to sell seats or meant to sell ad space. And that's a big reason why really good shows, or really shows that seem like they have really good potential, get canceled right away, or really bad shows last for 20 seasons, you know. So it's all about revenue. And if you're a connoisseur of television and things, you get to where you sort of get desensitized to quality, where you think things that are maybe not that great um, are. And because that's what's available. And then now we're in an era where there's tons more to pick from than there ever has been before. And I'm loving that. Because anytime I'm like doing my work, like, if I'm painting a painting, or if I'm writing or whatever, I've always got the TV on. I'm always watching something. So I get to see a lot of television shows, and I love that. And I'm loving having all these different options. But in terms of the storytelling, and again, I don't know for sure that they did that, but I'm seeing a kind of a uptick in quality in shows where they're like, we know exactly where we're going, and we're not just going to see if we get greenlit for another season and then build on and build on and build on, because that's where shows go off the rails. Walking Dead is a prime example of that. It was excellent up until the introduction of the saviors, and then it just seemed to be, anything goes, throw anything at the wall and we'll go with it. And they just made so many horrible mistakes throughout that series that by the time it wrapped up, it was sort of like, oh, all right, I guess, you guys made such a mess out of this because you were so worried about revenuing that you completely ruined the show. This show did not go on nearly as long, Animal Kingdom, I mean, and had a much tighter story, and didn't falter in the way that shows like that do. And I think that was probably the best key to its success. And just an FYI, if I say like, oh, this character did that and it was so cool, or they did this or that, I'm acknowledging the entire package here. It's just like I said, for brevity purposes, I can't, be like, oh, and the writing was so sharp, and the cinematography was so great, and the acting was, it's whole package, it's what I'm talking about. So just FYI on that. And a lot of this, also having the tight story and it seeming like they had it all planned out ahead of time. This particular story really felt like as if a new Shakespeare story had been discovered and was being adapted. So I thought it was super cool that it had like these really modern elements of quality storytelling, but it also had these extremely classic elements of like original storytelling, pretty much. Because a lot of the Shakespearean tragedies are about, a wealthy, powerful family tearing itself apart. And this was exactly that. It wasn't just outside forces tearing them down. It was them tearing themselves down. And I loved, actually the very last episode, when Andrew Pope, which I'll say interchangeably because he says it interchangeably, I'm sure, but that's, but I love the moment between, when there was a physical fight between Pope and Jay. And it's like, just in my mind, I was like, this is so Shakespearean. Like, it's uncles versus nephew, like that's such a classical storyline of everything just coming apart that way. And you just watch the downward spiral, because in the series we see through flashbacks, so we see the rise of the empire, and then in the present timeline we see the fall of the empire. We don't know about any of the good times in between. They reference them here and there, but that's not really what it's all about. So it's sort of a very fast ride in that way, and things happen so quickly a lot of the time that it takes time to think about it. So once again, spoilers. Okay, so last time I'll mention that you're on your own now. But what I, one thing I really liked about it is, and I've said this before in my other show, my other streams, my other what's it's, my favorite show of all time is Bonanza, the Western. It's been my favorite show for probably over 20 years. Like it's my favorite. And I'm gonna have a lot of upcoming episodes about that. But it was such a successful show. For those of you who don't know it more intimately, it was such a successful show. It ran for 14 seasons through the late 50s, all through the 60s, and into the 70s. And it had so much going for it, and was able to gain so much of an audience. It sort of, especially I think for TV writers and people who produce material, even nowadays, even though it was so far removed from now, the model that the show created, I think it's kind of not necessarily intentionally resourced by writers these days, but it was such a strong working model for a show. I think it's sort of ingrained into our how does the show work, what makes a show successful idea. Because if you take the structure of Animal Kingdom and you compare it to Bonanza, they're very very similar. You have in both cases a single parent who is self-made with a giant empire of money and power that they've amassed by themselves, and then they've got three sons. I realize there's more than three sons, but I'm talking in the core here. But you have three sons. The eldest is sort of the parents' right hand man, and the kind of the high functioning sociopath, because they've seen it all and they've been through everything. The middle son is sort of like looked at as like the big dumb brawler, and the youngest son is the oversexed hothead impulsive one who does the craziest stuff. So they line up very close in that way. And like I said, I never read anywhere that they did that deliberately. I just think it's such an ingrained successful way of presenting a family dynasty story that you can just really go to that very easily. And obviously there's other characters, there's Baz and there's Julia and stuff, but the core, and Jay, and the core group, I think it really kind of borrows from that same dynamic, and that probably was created a lot of success, made it such a successful show, because like I said, it worked for Bonanza for 14 years. So they were, they're very very comparable in that way. And it moves so fast that it's kind of confusing at times, but not in the way that like they've made mistakes and are just glossing over them, but it's more to the like, you got to figure out why we did this kind of a scenario. Like at the time, Baz's death happened so fast, I was like, oh, I'm sure he's just gonna get back up and be real angry now, because he was very angry before, but now he's gonna be very angry. But that didn't happen, so I was taken quite by surprise on that one. And I was like, they're just gonna kill a main character that fast? Like that's what we're doing? We're going like that? And then another point that I was really confused about initially was the storyline with the cousins and setting the sons up with the gold. That didn't really exactly make sense to me at first either, but I came to realize after the fact it was because she thought she was kind of wiping the slate clean by giving them all something to go with. She was getting rid of her empire by giving everything to Pamela Johnson, who we didn't know who that was at the time. It just seemed like some rando until it was explained. And it was very confusing until you realized, well, they weren't supposed to give the gold back. She wasn't intending for that to happen. She knew that they did not have the capability for various reasons to run what she had created. And Jay was inserting himself into the situation at that point, and wanting to take things into a different direction. So she knew that it could not go without her leadership, and was hoping to kind of just set them up and let them wind them up and let them go, basically, because she knew that she was going to do something to create a suicide situation. Like she knew she was going into that situation and she wasn't coming out of it. So, but that took me a minute to kind of figure it out about what was going on. And it was the same with when I realized in again, I was doing the conspiracy board thing in my mind, like why would they act this way if they wanted this way? And it took me the entire series, literally up until right before I watched the premiere of episode of season 6, the last series or season, excuse me, um which basically confirmed that I was right, where the whole time, and the only other time I've seen anything done like this, and if you haven't seen Mr. Robot, I'm gonna spoil something about Mr. Robot, so put the earmuffs on real quick. The only time I've ever seen um, another show do this kind of deception type of a thing was in Mr. Robot in the season, I think was it season 4, where where Elliot was intermixing with all of these other people, the new characters and stuff, and it was kind of confusing what he was doing, and he was doing jobs for them and on the dark web. And it's like what's going on here? And then he later explains in voiceover, he's like, well, I had to lie to you because I knew that you wouldn't accept the fact that none of this was real. And I was actually in prison the whole time that this was happening. And all these people were just people around me in prison. But I didn't want to lose you, like you being like his ally. So, okay, earmuffs can come off. But that's the only time that I really saw anything where it was that deceptive or that silently done, because I couldn't figure out up front why Baz hated Smurf so much. Like, I understand, like, the character of Smurf, she was a real asshole. Like, everybody hated her, right? Like, and you were meant to hate her. And in some ways, as an audience member, you kind of respect the character because she is, this self-made woman leader who has this, team of organized criminals that work for her, and she's the man of Oceanside, and we see through the flashbacks that how she became, took down the original man of Oceanside and took its place. And so there's a respect there from the audience, but at the same time, she's loathsome. She's really awful and really hard to take. So we're like, okay, well, I understand why they don't like her. I don't understand why they don't want to be around her, this kind of thing, and why they don't go see her when she's in prison. And but it was still kind of confusing as to why Baz hated her as much as he did. And when we start to see more flashbacks, and they really kind of start leaning into that, in the later part of the flashbacks, not the full last season, but in the later part where we first see her arrive in Oceanside and decide she's going to take it over. And she's working with Baz's mom, who either owns the strip club or she's higher up there. It kind of was indistinguished. And because she's trying to get close to the guy she wants to take out, who's running everything there, the organized crime in Oceanside. And we see that we are informed before that Baz's father had physically abused him as a child. And then we see a totally different story with the mother. She's, working, she's got a nice house, she's got a steady job. We see young Baz, he seems very well taken care of and in a good situation. But we know also that he knows that he was abused by his father, so it's a little inconsistent there. But every time that there was an inconsistency, I knew that they were up to something, and it was supposed to be that way, and it was, because they don't hand you this storyline at all. You are on your own to figure this out. But when you get it wasn't just, I want what you've got, I want to take over your empire. It was way more nuanced than that. It's like, because the level of hatred really didn't match the other characters who seemingly had been more abused and less trusted than Baz was. Baz was in the hierarchy really more higher ranked than Pope was. She used Pope like an attack dog. They both did when in the flashbacks. You see that, but she seemed very, very like one-on-one with Baz. So it sort of didn't add up exactly. But when you start to kind of, if you connect the dots, it kind of just breaks open after a minute, where you realize this was never about revenge. It was never about greed from him. And again, we don't really get to know his character as much as we do the others. But it was like the reason his ire for her didn't seem to match, and he really couldn't rally the other people, the other brothers, into being as angry. Um, and there seemed to be, we didn't know much about Julia at that point either. And it was very peculiar how detached that Baz was. Like, he had the girlfriend or the wife and the daughter Kath and Lena, but he also had the girlfriend, and he really just did not seem to care about any of them at all. Like, he was just completely out of it. So his character seemed very confusing initially, and then as you watch and you realize, even after his character is gone from the show and you see him in flashbacks and you see his mom and his living condition and stuff, you realize it wasn't about whatever conflict arose that we did not yet know between all of them and Julia, or Smurf and Julia in particular. It was way deeper than that, because we're led to believe the entire time, we are fed the narrative and believe that it to be true, that Smurf rescued Baz at a young age from a bad situation and brought him into the family to be one of them. And they were all raised together, and it makes the Julia situation that we find out more about later a lot weirder. And we have this suspicion the whole time. Like, they're never shy about the fact that he is not related. Like, we understand that. And then right when Jay gets involved with the family and they're about to pull the church job, and it's really Jay's first big job, they're planning for it in the garage, and Jay pulls Baz aside and just point blank asks him, "Are you my father?" And Baz loses his shit. Like, he gets so mad, and he's like, "Why does it matter? Who cares? This is not important right now." And he just really chews him out. And we're like, God, why? Why did you act like that to him? You know, like, you're supposed to build trust here or whatever. But we think that he's just being mean and callous. But then when you realize what's going on, it was because it kind of made him panic and go back to that place in his mind, because the conflict with Smurf was not just about what happened with Julia. We see that actually happen later, but it was because we had been led down this road of thinking that she rescued him from a bad situation, when in reality they had said a couple of times that as children, Julia and Pope connected with Baz so much that they just absolutely loved him, and they all loved each other so much, and that's what made their little team unit so strong. And it's supposed to seem sort of sentimental, and her taking him in, it's like, well, she does bad things, but she also does good things. No, that was a lie. What it was we see that he obviously had some sort of conflict with his father. But his father wasn't in the picture in the flashbacks. His mother had a good job and a good house. And the last time we see Baz briefly as a child playing with Julia, and he's well taken care of. He looks good and healthy. And the last time we see the mother, she's carrying in a bag of groceries into her house, and Smurf is waiting for her there. And then that story cuts off. So when you connect those dots, it wasn't just about what happened, which we find out later, what happened with Julia. It was about that Smurf decided she wanted him. She wanted to take him and give him to her children. And she took him by whatever means she decided and was able to do, because she seemed capable of anything. And that's what made her so dangerous. Is his living situation was good. He was loved by his mother. He lived primarily with his mother. But she actually took him. She took him. She decided she wanted him, and she took him into her family and away from his mother. And we don't even know what happened to his mother. So the hatred for Smurf is not just, I want what you have, or you treated Julia unfairly and you treated me unfairly. It was way deeper than that. And that was sort of this big breakthrough moment where I'm like, oh my God, this show is a show within a show. Like, and they did not tell you this was going to happen. They did not hold your hand and be like, connect those dots. There's dots to be connected. No, they let you do it all completely on your own. And it was incredible. But then it all kind of comes together in the first episode of the last season, which is called 1992, where we see them forming their criminal pod. Like, they're all now old enough to work uh, for Smurf, and she's been, building them up and teaching them all these skills. And we also start to see in her, because we saw her from the beginning of her evolution, and now she is in charge of everything. She is the man. She's got the money, but she's not like the millionaire, real estate owner that she ultimately becomes. Um, but we see how she's employing the older kids, and she also does this thing, which plays a lot into the story. There's an A team and a B team. The way that these things are divided, and the flashbacks really round that out. That a lot of people probably have seen this, if not experienced it, but there are a lot of families where there have a lot of children, and maybe wide age range between the children. Sometimes the parents get to a point where they're just checked out, like they just kind of are like, let the younger ones raise themselves. I'm done being a parent. I'm going to make sure they eat and they have clothes, but I just cannot be there for them anymore. Or they do it to the older ones, like, just you're on your own now, I can't deal with this anymore. And we see that dynamic play out really strongly in the flashbacks between her relationship with Baz, Andrew, and Julia, and her relationship to Craig and Darren. And it's almost as if she's like not even involved with Craig and Darren at all. Like, they have a completely separate life and are not connected at all. And what's also really interesting about it is you've got 3 generations of people in the same family. You've got Smurf is boomers. Then the Baz, Julia, and Andrew are Gen X. Then you've got Craig and Darren, whom are millennials, I guess 4. And then I guess you would say that it's and then Jay is like Gen Z. So it's like you've got a huge spread of ages and characters, and that doesn't falter at all. That makes it better, because you see all these different experiences happening for these different people. And when we start to see in the flashbacks how disengaged she was from the younger children, and what we know about them, which was that Craig and Darren are very close in age, about 5 years apart, and 3 or 5 years apart. And that Darren started to become early on like a kind of a surf star. Like, he was competitive, he could compete, he'd won some, he was a professional surfer from a young age, but she wouldn't have anything to do with it. It was interfering with her plans and the older kids' plans and what she was trying to build. So we ultimately find out that she was paying to have him sabotaged in competitions. And we also see from some arguments, because Craig and Darren, they're the closest of anybody, but they fight a lot physically and emotionally. They're at odds probably more often than they are together, but that's sort of the nature of the relationship. That's sort of like their anger towards each other, and their past build up between each other, that's always coming up and coming up and coming up, is their relationship. So that's sort of almost how they love each other, and because they're so close. And then we find out that while before she'd really started sabotaging his career to get him to bring them into the fold when they were old enough, and she was going to find a place for them in the organization, there's arguments about, like families do, like you argue about stupid shit from the past, right? And that you never got over, and you blame each other for it. So we find out that when Craig was just barely old enough, to start driving, he was trying to facilitate Darren's career. Like, he was taking him around and taking him to places and competitions and stuff. But they each had a different view of this. This came up in one of their particular arguments, or one or two of them, where Craig thought he was doing his best, but he was too young, and Darren thought he was too immature and he was ruining it for him. And like, they both had a different view of how that was, because Darren was always salty about losing out on the surf career. And we also kind of find out some interesting stuff because of what happens with Adrian and how he gets involved in drug trafficking. Adrian being Darren's, I guess, his one true love, you'd say. But he, I knew about surfing a little bit, but I didn't really connect the dots myself about like how these things work, about how the sponsorships work, and you have to be sponsored, and it's a super expensive thing to take part in. So even though the Codys had the money to completely facilitate Darren's career, Smurf was not interested in that for them or him, and ultimately sabotaged him with by threats and by bribery to judges until he just fell out of it, and he couldn't get the kind of sponsorships that he needed because people were too afraid of her. So even though Craig and Darren tried to make something of it because that's what they were doing and they were kind of left to their own devices growing up, she ultimately put a stop to it to be able to put them in there. And that's that holdover stuff ultimately kind of seasons their characters, and we see a big difference in everybody's personalities and how that they handle things and they internalize things. And of everyone, those two are the closest and have the closest relationship, and I think that's why they're at odds most of the time, and they're just beating the holy shit out of each other all the time. But I don't know if anybody noticed this, but in the last big fight they get into right before the end, they're in the garage, everybody's in the garage. It was before the jewelry at the celebrity's house, the jewelry heist. And Craig has been distancing himself from everybody, and he's hanging out with those other motorcycle losers. And he was trying to get clean, but it was not good for him, obviously. But he storms off, and then Darren gets super mad, runs after him, and like hits him like wrestler style over the back with a stool, knocks him down, and they're under the view of the camera, and Darren punches him in the back of the head. And I'm like, did they do this on purpose? Like, are they really fighting like they're making it like this, like serious, like where things had evolved up to the point with them that now we're doing back of the head punches, and they beat the holy shit out of each other that time as well. And we also get a really cool narrative, stepping aside, looking at the big picture again with them all. We get a really interesting view, let's say non-traditional view of generational trauma and growing up in traumatic circumstances, where you kind of straddle the line of like, I'm a participant and bad things are happening to me at the same time through my formative years. And that's what we get through all of the kids. Even though the age differences are really big, we get that all the way through. And we see that it all starts with Smurf, because right in the very beginning, we find out that her mom got her involved in criminal things, and she, stealing drugs out of medicine cabinets and getting involved with sketchy men. And then that's where we first see where the kind of thing where Smurf, the real depth of how far she'll go for revenge, because she seeks out the man who abused her and caused her mom to get killed, ultimately in a botched robbery. And she figures out who he is, and she finds him, she tracks him down, pretends to be somebody else, and then kills him. And she had taken the nickname Smurf from that guy as a means of, because Smurf's a dumb nickname. I mean, for like a crime boss, like it's a dumb nickname. But what it ultimately we find out about that really early on is she adopted that nickname sort of as motivation to never forget to find that guy and kill him, or about like how angry that made her and motivated her into doing what she was going to do, like her version of success. Because we find out that that guy that she kills gave her that nickname. And so it was always kind of there, like when she has people calling her that, it's sort of like, like reopening the wound, like every time she's referred to in that way, so that she never forgets, that kind of the self-flagellation, you might say. So we really get the first look into how her mind works pretty early on. I think that was all first season stuff. And we start to see that, like, yes, the trauma is generational, but there is also an aura of psychopathy that runs through the family, and sociopathy, more so sociopathy. And this is a very nuanced discussion that I'm going to just kind of gloss over real quick, but for the sake of discussion, it's confusing exactly where the line between sociopathy and psychopathy is. But basically, sociopathy is you can do bad things, and you know what you're doing. You have weighed the situation, and it might be good for you. It might be good for someone else. you might just want to do it. But so psychopathy really is more, you do bad things just because you want to, and that's all. Like, there's no other reason for it, just because you want to. So again, that's a very, very basic, discussion of what those things are. It's a lot more nuanced and a lot more descriptive than that. But for the sake of this discussion, we kind of need to know about that, because the sociopathy, again, is more intelligent. And you might have you've probably heard the high functioning sociopath type of a thing. And earlier I said about the firstborn child having that. And you've heard, if you ever saw the Sherlock series with Benedict Cumberbatch, he describes himself as a high functioning sociopath. So it's just it's being aware of what you're doing and knowing the difference between wrong and right, and hurting people and not hurting people. But it's a means to an end as far as it goes. And we see this aura of sociopathy in Smurf for sure, but also it's in Andrew, and it's in Baz. And well, we don't really know Baz enough. He gets killed so quickly. He's sort of between. We don't really see him motivated by much more than revenge on Smurf. But so we don't really know if he has that same mentality, because this also might be a genetic thing, not just, it's a nature versus nurture conversation of how much were they exposed to that they learned the sociopathy, and how much were they born with to tend towards sociopathy. Because certainly Andrew has it. We don't know enough about Julia, but probably Darren does, and Jay does. But Craig doesn't really embody that at all. He's more self-destructive and more of an emotional character. So he really doesn't do what the others do in terms of moving forward. He kind of just exists in the world. And compared to, not that he doesn't have skills, he's got an amazing skill set. Like they show that. It's very Western, and that's another way that it reminds me of Bonanza. It's very Western structured, very Wild Wild West mentality. Like we make our own rules. We are the boss of the world. We have gains. We will take what we want, and we will stop at nothing if we feel that that's the thing to do. We make the rules. But when you compare and contrast the mentalities of the characters versus their experiences, then you do see a tendency towards them all having that sociopathic tendency, except for Craig, who can do bad things, but he really has pretty much the cleanest reputation of all of them, up until the end where his baby gets stolen and he kills some Nazis. So, I mean, brava. Like, that's really what we want to see there. I mean, that was, I think, really excellent for his storyline as well. Because what they do with his storyline in particular is he's kind of on the outs of everything. He's really just it's not that they don't care for him. It's not that he doesn't have a place or skills. He just, for himself, doesn't really know where he fits into things. And back when he was trying to help Darren with his career, he fit into something. But everybody seems to be, according to him, doing their own thing, involved in something, counted on something. He and Darren have a discussion right in the very beginning, first, second episode, where they're breaking down a car that they used in that botched jewelry store robbery, where he's complaining about, they think that we're the stupid ones. They give us the shit jobs of breaking down the car. Like, they don't trust us. It's all them and us. And, and he's really mad about it. So he doesn't feel like he is really one of anybody. And I think that's ultimately why he seeks out other people, and it never works out. They never know what he knows. They haven't been through what he's been through. And he also has this tendency to get involved with younger people, like actual kids, like high school kids. And we see that when he and Nikki, Jay's girlfriend, in the beginning, they kind of connect a little bit and have a I guess it's a sexual relationship, not really a friendly or romantic relationship. And he's very reckless, does reckless stuff, and then later connects with other kids, and there'll be kids hanging around him and stuff, and it's like, why do you have these kids around you? It's because nobody listens to him, and nobody takes his point of view into consideration. He's pretty much considered not valid as far as like it's sit down and let the grown-ups sort this out kind of a situation. So he's just trying to have some control and some mentorship over his life, and you see him at different times um tell like a little story or like a little anecdote, and then the person won't understand. He's like, that wasn't why I was telling you this. That wasn't the point of the story. So he actually seems like, of all the characters who ends up being a father, that he, if he, had lived, that he would have made a good father, because he finally would have had that adult child in the right measure mentorship. And that's again why he, I think, ended up as a self-destructive character more so than like the others that had the more ladder climbing sociopathy. That he just was lost in the world, and he was often referring to things that happened in high school or people he knew in high school, and why he was always had that connection with Ren. And even though they were terrible together, absolutely terrible, and the things that they did to each other back and forth, where he left her for dead and robbed her, and then she got him back by getting her cousins to act like they were going to kill him, and making him like walk through the motions of thinking he was being overdosed, and a really kind of embarrassing scenario, and his mom had to come and bail him out of it. It was, and it was just kind of, he didn't really fit in with adults, and then the adults that he would find to fit in with were bad fits. So he really kind of just bumbled around, but that didn't make it mean like he was stupid. They just kind of treated him, everybody treated him like he was stupid. And I think we've all known somebody like that, how like they're actually not dumb, it's just that everybody treats them like they are, so they're just like, fuck it, whatever, I'm the dumb one, who cares? And they don't really have anything of their own. But in terms of let's say, we know that Pope is also exhibits that kind of level of sociopathy, because he, well, we know that he's got some OCD issues or some form of mental instability, but we just don't know to the level what it is, because that's never really the main focus. Just that something is amiss, and he's trying to deal with it, especially with Smurf is gone. He doesn't know what, if she was doing for him. She could, kind of reason with him and keep him in line, and he spirals out, and things don't make sense to him, and all this. So we know that he will do what he is told, because he is subservient in that way. And he also spends the entire, especially in the flashbacks, the entire series just being absolutely lost in the world. Especially after Smurf dies, like, he really melts down. It's not because he loved her so much, it's just because he feared her so much, and she kept him going. She made sense to him in a way that nobody else did. She could reason with him in a certain way that nobody else could, that others couldn't really reach. But then when you get down to, the behavior of like Darren, he's much more not psychopath actually, but like much more reckless in terms of the things that he will do, and the crazy behaviors, very hot-headed about things. And if you think back about like what he did to Adrian, when he thought that he was getting caught in the bathroom by Jay, and he, getting a blowjob, and he says, "Oh, this guy was trying to steal my wallet," and then Jay kind of looks at him like, "Well, your dick is out," and kind of kicks at him a little bit. But I mean, that's supposed to be like his one true love, but he like beats the holy shit out of him, right? So I mean, like, he's very, very reckless and kind of out of control, as they all go. But I think that the river runs deepest with Jay for sure, because Jay is an actual serial killer. He starts off as a young teenager, and he really only gets up to like 2021, something like that, in the course of the series. And we watch him go from what seems like helpless kid in a bad situation, to try almost emulating Smurf's journey, like a self-made guy, and he's buying these buildings, he's undermining her every chance he gets. He's got a vendetta against her in a different way than Baz had. But we start off in a place with him where we're like, oh, you feel bad for him because you see what's happened. But then we watch him over the course of the show do 4 face-to-face murders of women in his life that just somehow caused a problem for him. And if you look at, if you fast forward to the end, the last murder of Penny, the lawyer girlfriend that he just was going to take with until she put the brakes. That murder is very suspicious. And I got more about that here in a minute. I still got tons of time to go. I try to limit these things to an hour, but strap in. Take your, take breaks if you need to. This is going to be on my YouTube later after this is on. So I can't help it. There's a lot to say. But point being is we see him kill women that are very close to him in certain ways, and that he's had had some sort of, not an intimate like sexually, but like intimate relationship with, and that paints the picture when we get to the murder of Penny and the way it's done and the fact that he overdoses her. It really makes an argument that when we see him in the opening scenes of the first episode and he's sitting there with Julia, who's already OD'd and dead, and we know that Allison, her friend, comes and makes a remark about how he used to shoot them up because they would get so badly jittering and that they were missing the veins, and he would have to shoot them up, so he knew how to do it. Now, he didn't shoot up Penny, he just drugged her drink. But there's an argument there that maybe he was a serial killer the entire time. And we were supposed to think, oh, this poor kid thrown into this really bad situation, had a really bad upbringing. Now he's in this really scary, no way out style situation. But when you get to the end, you're like, kill him! Like you're hoping that when they're out, he and Pope are fighting in the floor, that he actually kills him. And when he got him that time that he tries to kill him in the pool, and he's got him strapped to the chair, and he's going to throw him into the pool. Because I love that, actually. Like, I went from feeling really bad for him, like, oh, this is such a typical situation with the opioid crisis, and this is such a typical situation that we see it play out, and then we're going to see it go into like a not typical story. But then by the end, it's like, I want him dead. Like, it was such a weird progression, and that's so Shakespearean, to go on a journey with somebody where you would root for them. You think, okay, yeah, you're doing a great job, you're really making it, you're taking over, you're smarter than she was, blah 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 blah, and by the end you realize he's been the bad guy the whole time. So in my mind, I mean, I realize there's an argument can be made here, but in my mind, I feel like there's a really good chance that he OD'd Julia in the very beginning. And we do see him blame the drug dealer who was trying to shake him down for money for what she owed, and say it was your stuff that did it. But I don't know, it's kind of pointing the finger. And we also see in the beginning some very curious stuff that you don't really connect the dots on until later. When they take him out, when Smurf comes to get him, he obviously has her phone number, he knows how to contact her, he knows who she is. They're just living a little farther away and not involved, because we know all the shit with Smurf and Julia. But she was a phone call away. She shows up immediately, takes him in immediately, makes his life, gives him go from poor kid to rich kid. And then he goes back to the apartment before it's fully cleaned out. He left everything there. And we're talking about like mementos and photographs and stuff when he's trying to figure out who his dad was. So he did not care to even take a picture. We see that kind of collecting up picture stuff later. But he didn't take a picture of her. He didn't take anything of hers. He just left it all there. And then when he's trying to contact some random man with a phone number to try to see if he was the dad, and then he kind of breaks down in tears, you feel at that moment, you're like, oh, this is so sad. This happens to people. This kind of thing happens to people. But and then when he killed Penny, he also did the same thing. He sat there and kind of cried over her body, and was like hugging her hand and like leaning against her and stuff. But then at that point you realize this was not because he loved her so much. This is because she said no and he didn't get his way, and she wasn't going to go out of the country with him, and because she saw what a bad situation she had ended up in with him. So that's why I think, I don't want to be like 100% he killed his mom, because again, that's a Shakespearean thing. But I would say he killed his mom. And this started off with him starting off being a serial killer. from the beginning, and we just didn't know it, and it was another hidden storyline that played itself out all the way through. And I think maybe the best moment his character had was when Pope had him tied to the chair, the lawn chair, and was getting ready to throw him in the pool to kill him because he was done with it and it was over, and he just escaped the prison bus and the shootout and all the horrible shit that had just gone down. And at first Jay tries to beg and plead and be like, I didn't know, and I couldn't, and I this and I that, and then he just switches and he's like, fuck you, I kill you all. Like, it's really how it, like, in that switch, that it was so cool to see anybody do that. Like, I think, what was it, The Score from years ago, or there was a movie with Edward Norton, and he did that, where like where he just suddenly switched, and it's like, oh geez, wow. And that's some really good, cool writing and acting there, when somebody can do that and have reason to do it. And so that's, in terms of their characters, he was definitely the most dangerous, definitely the most questionable. But what was really funny, I think probably one of my favorite moments of the entire series, is when Darren is kind of messing around with another group of criminals when they were stealing the cars from Los Angeles and stuff, and that guy kept bugging him for more jobs, bugging him, and finally he couldn't get rid of him, like, and he shot him in the back room he executed him basically in the back room, but before of the bar. But before that had happened, he warned him once, and he had him on the ground, and he shot a gun off right next to his ear, and he said, there's a lot of us Codys, and I'm the nice one. And it's like, you think you're the nice one? Like, you're the worst one. Like, you are so mean. Like, he was the craziest, meanest one, not counting Jay, obviously, but like, Jay was metered about his craziness, but he was the craziest one for sure. Like, he thought he was the nice one, and I loved that about the character, like, how you can think that you are the nice one, but you're actually like the worst one. And that is what's super interesting and contextual about these characters, about how they can have so many things going on for them, and you could start off with them, in some cases, liking them and feeling bad for them, and then getting to hate them, and vice versa. So I think that was super, super cool. And another thing about Jay that I kind of thought about this later, was like, his name is Joshua and Josh, and some people call him that, and it never seems to fit. And he never laughs or smiles or anything, and he's never like in this like happy place ever, maybe just a little bit, and if he does, it's really creepy. But he goes by Jay, and not J-A-Y like a name, but J, the initial. And then I realized, like, that was another one of his moves of depersonalization. Like, he wanted to be this person who was like not looked at like a person, but like an entity, kind of like, less of I'm your nephew and I'm your boyfriend and I'm your grandson. Like, he did not want people to see him this way. It wasn't just a shortening of the name. Like, it's not that unusual, but in his case, it was to depersonalize himself from these people and to become this sort of a monster. Honestly, it was like, you would, like The Shape, like how you call Michael Myers, he was called The Shape. It's sort of the same mentality. And something that is like super, 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 super cool, which seems like, why would this be cool? Like, I pretty much, like, this show it's a very testosterone-y show. It's a very, very masculine show, but it is completely non-exploitative of women, and it is not sexist in the least. And I've never seen anything like that. You would think this would be the prime situation for that. And I think they want to point to the fact that they were brought up by a strong woman, and they don't look at women as being unequal to them, so they don't treat them as unequals. But they really manifest this in, like, whenever other shows, like Forever, and for movies, when they would have, like, it's just such a weird point, but it actually ends up being really valid. Like maybe this is just me, but like, when I see a sex scene in a movie or a show, it always plays in my mind like the MacGruber movie, where like he has like this really disgusting sex scene with a woman, and he's like sweating like really bad all over, and she's like, ew. And then the immediate next scene is him having sex with another woman, like a ghost. Like, it literally is back to back. Like, that always, every time I see that, because they're always so stupid and gratuitous, and they don't advance the plot. They're just like, trying to get, like, if it's a woman's show, it's trying to get like the boyfriend or the man to be like, oh, I might see a nip, you know, so they get their attention into that. And or if it's a show that is intended more for men or mixed audiences, then they're very physically exploitative of the female actors. Like, here's boobs for no reason, but the man is all covered up and hidden by her body, and you know, it's like what the hell. And this is just the way it's always been. Women have always been exploited. This is not, you know, a new song here that I'm singing. But so whenever this show is very sex scene heavy, and initially when they would get going, I would just sort of like ignore them and go about my business, you know, and then like kind of tune back in mentally like when it was over with, because it was like eye rolling to me, like MacGruber stuff, like all right, fine. But then I started saw something in it that I have never seen in anything else ever, like ever, which is that these scenes actually told the story of their characters as well, for the way that like if you look at like how much certain characters are having sex and how much some are not. Like when anytime you see a Pope in a sex scene, it's very strained. If he finishes at all, he has to have the woman on her like facing away from him, and it's very hard for him to perform. And even from the flashbacks to the present. And then if you see like they're always the whole time making fun of Craig for saying that he, you know, promoting this idea that he's this big sex master or whatever. And his scenes are usually really like a lot going on, a lot of context, a lot and very visual. Like you see as much of him nude as you do, you know, his partners, and he's doing a lot. And so when they're making fun of him, they reflect that in the scenes with him. And then, you know, when you see Darren in his scenes, he's like he tends more towards violence and aggression in his scenes, and sort of wants to, you know, I don't mean like, you know, like Marquis de Sade type of things, but just like it's sort of an aggressiveness. Like when he was, you know, kind of messing around with that couple, he he did his best to break them up, and he would always be like kind of physically aggressive, and the sex scenes would sort of be on the fly, not really like these elaborate scenes like you'd see maybe with Craig or this more stage stuff with Andrew. And then when you see Jay's scenes, he would always just like barely be present, like 1 foot out the door, like all the time. Like he's like got some clothes on, like she's like he's not really engaged in it, like he's enjoying it. It's more like he's just like taking part in it, like it's like a just like exercise or something. Like, and you don't see much of him. So it's like I started to kind of realize they even are telling stories in places that normal shows would just be like, hey, boobies, you know. So that was great. Like if you're a female viewer and you are sick to death of seeing, you know, even in high quality things, like I just finished, and I'll talk about this another time because it really was great. But I didn't want to watch it initially, but I got into it, which was a mini series called Fleischman is in Trouble. They have a lot of scenes between, that's brand new as well, even newer than Animal Kingdom. And in the opening of the show, there's a lot of scenes of Jesse Eisenberg having sex with different women, and the women are always very splayed out. There's boobs, there's, you know, they're all over the place. Like you see them like covering him up, and it's like, God damn it. Like I had just come off this other show where I was finally seeing some equalness and some stories, and here's just like montage of do it. And it's so, ugh, you know, it just gets to where it's just like, all right, that's enough. So, okay, so moving past the characterizations, we still got quite a few more points here, and I apologize for the run of this, but I really didn't want to split this into 2 episodes. Some of my favorite moments that I absolutely loved, and I did hear a little bit of, I watched a little bit of stuff afterward, but again, there really wasn't much to refer to. There's some little featurettes that I found on YouTube that they would do, where they kind of would watch the scene and talk about how the scene came to be. The coolest thing, I think, in the whole series was the warehouse shootout. That was an absolute Western, old-fashioned shootout. And that was where we really get to see everyone perform at their highest level. And I think I heard somebody say that they had done so much choreography for that, and you could tell it looks like a dance. It's beautifully done because I love a good shootout, and I will watch for it not being good or people not being, like I also I'm a big fan going way back of like dance, like Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, like getting to see the movement, the skill, the physical ability, right? And we never saw them in shootouts. That would have been pretty rad. But point is like you have to have that to be able to pull off a good shootout scene. You really do. You have to be able to do it. So my favorite, I think, scene from the whole thing was the warehouse shootout because it was cut together beautifully. It flowed in the story perfectly. It was so excellent, and you really got to see everybody's skill. And I think um for me, I ended up focusing on, I saw everybody do everything and they really gave them all their own time, but I really ended up focusing on Craig the most because he had a gun in each hand and he was moving so fluidly. It was like a dance with him. He had this great fluid motion where like his character, because they would always go in with vests on anyways, which was super smart because in the old days you wouldn't see that in any capacity, but he was just kind of floating, for being such a large person. You kind of underestimate that large people don't just lumber, like that they can really move around like light on their feet. And I thought that was so neat, like just how fluid he moved around. And then you get that again in my like other favorite part, which was the cousins. When the cousins show up at the house, like that was so crazy. Like I love that. Like when I was watching the show, like the lights cut out, right? And you're just like, what the hell's going on now? You don't think about what is actually going to happen, like, or what it is or who it is. And then you realize it's these prepper ass cousins with night vision goggles and sniper rifles, and they have come to the house and they're going to shoot them up. And it's like they barely got out of that. They didn't have their vests or anything. They didn't even have guns at hand. They didn't know what was happening. They were absolutely taken by surprise. And that was such an excellent shootout. Oh man, it was so, because you never knew. The whole time you're watching the show, you're like, these guys live a life of crime. They're like high danger all the time. You don't know, Baz has already been killed by that point, so like they could drop anybody else at any point. And that was another one where they really focused on how Craig was able to move through the scene, because he ends up on the roof of the pool house, and I think that's basically where it gets finished. And then and they're together in different ways, and they absolutely got dropped on. Like they did not have the edge with that whatsoever. And it was so cool to see that they literally only, like, they didn't have, the only high ground that they had is where they knew that they had weapons stashed like everywhere, and they knew the layout. The cousins had the weaponry, they had the night vision. They come in there like the goddamn military, like, so they only had seconds to figure out how not to get murdered at that point. And then they just took them all out except for one, and that one was Nick Stahl. And that was the first thing that I'd seen him in for a really long time, because I know he went through some drug addiction issues in his real life and his personal life, and he had just gotten straightened out. And I was like, if you're a millennial, you know Nick Stahl, like so when I saw him, I was like, oh my god, I was so excited. And then later he's starting to turn up in more stuff. He turned up in first season of Let the Right One in a pretty substantial role, and it was like, oh, I'm so glad that he's back. But I was like, at first I was like, is one of the cousins Nick Stahl? And I was like, yeah, I know Nick Stahl when I see him. So that's really where that came from, and I was so excited. It was a teeny weeny little role, but it was so cool, and he got to be the only one that survived, and was like, I didn't want to do this. I'm sorry we did this, and they let him live. Well, Andrew let him live, but I don't think everybody did. But, and also that's again where it was sort of confusing. Like they decided to give the gold back. Like they didn't really understand the circumstances of what they were doing when they stole it. It was all Smurf's plan. And they also did a really cool thing where when she took Andrew out there to meet his family and to meet the cousins and his uncle and all that, and we knew that guy was a bad guy. She had actually harbored like a vendetta against him. Like, she's like, yeah, let's go see all your stuff because we want these guns or whatever. And they show this tiny little move where which, like, families do this, like where they look at you like, you can convey things and looks, but he Andrew goes like this in her hand, and she shoves him off, and because he was like, this is not a good idea. Like, he was trying to say, we can't do this, we can't do this, but they were already breaking in, they were already leading the plot. So that was like really cool too, like that they have these little nuances throughout the series. And that you can take away so many things. And I'll bet if you watch the series more than once, like while I was watching, I was like, I need to go back and watch this again. But then by the ending, I was like, I don't want to watch it again. So I didn't end up doing that. But it was so cool to watch all these things come together, and then finally the whole story come together in the first episode of the last season, where we see why everybody was the way they were when we met them, and why they behaved the way that they behaved. And it all went back to Smurf being in a place where also her character was starting to become cognizant of aging, and she started to feel like she wasn't like the ingenue anymore, right? And her daughter was starting to rise up into that place, and then she was starting to see this weirdness between Julia and Baz start to take place, and bit by bit she was confirming it, and then Andrew, walked down on him at one point, and but that's where the revenge plot started with Baz. Like, that's where he knew that that Smurf had taken him away from his mom, and we start to see this kind of come together. And it's not that he didn't care about Julia, and that they weren't that tight little pod of kids growing up, but we see him, and even at one point he looks at Smurf while he's doing it, like they're out by the pool, and he looks at her like, I've got full control of her, I can do whatever I want, and I will do whatever I want. Where he started to kind of invite Julia into sexual situations. He's 2 years older than the twins were, so he was starting to kind of invite her, and it's still gross because like they were like brother-sister relationship. They'd always grown up brother-sister for years, like they'd been in that zone, like they'd grown up together side by side, and then now we hop on this kind of like sexual bandwagon, and I thought it was gross. And also on a side note about that, we see a lot of like over affection and present while nude from Smurf, like with everybody being nude and kind of in a very sexual mode, like she would be present for these things. And at first I was like, this is super gross. She's being overly affectionate with everybody, and that's gross. And then like she'll be like around them while they're totally naked, and that's gross. And I mean, I guess people do that, but that's just not for me. And then it kind of dawned on me, like that was a power move to say, there's nothing you can hide from me. There's nothing you can do that will stop me from knowing whatever. Like, I can see you, I will see you, I'm all knowing. So to me, it sort of rang as a power move. But then that also plays into the fact that she realized she was losing power. She started to realize, and this is told in the flashbacks, primarily in the 1992 episode, she started to realize that the kids were getting old enough now, that the older kids were getting old enough now, that they were really now part of the gang. They were fully fledged at this point. They weren't trainees anymore. And they were going to start getting actual work. She was going to start farming them out for actual work. And in her mind, there is I think a jealousy dynamic between her and Julia, because even of the twins, she seemed to care more about Baz, Smurf. So she seemed to be more interested in having Baz under her control than she did the Andrew and Julia. But she also wanted to was making an effort to train Julia into kind of taking her place as being leader of the Empire someday. And when Baz started putting a wedge between that, and she was, Julia being a pretty kind of a typical rebellious teenage girl, but under kind of extraordinary circumstances, and he found ways to kind of fray that relationship even further. And then, like I said, there's a point where he's got her, he's already messing with her, and he looks at Smurf inside the house, and the look is as if to say, I got her. She's going to do what I say, not what you say, and he already was wanting to try to exact revenge on her for what she'd done in disappearing his mother from him. So that all started, that revenge plot started way earlier. back then. But then, it looks like she throws Julia out for skimming and on a job, on her first big job. But it really wasn't about the skimming. Like, she doesn't give a shit about money. It was more about the fact that she knew she was taking her control away from the group, and that she was now a divisive presence, and she saw it way more as a betrayal. I want you to take over this empire situation, and you're doing this to me. Like, how could you do this to me? Type of a situation. And then she got so petty about it that she literally chased her off and caused her to ruin her life, basically, to turn into a drug addict. Like the first night she was out on her own. So, it wasn't about it wasn't about the skimming. It was about that she was losing control because Pope and Baz were way more invested in Julia, and she needed to get her out. Sort of like in the wild, where they turn out like the wild animals will turn out like the babies to have more, because they can't have that kind of challenge for mates and things like that. So it's really sort of primal in that way. It just went really, really far, and it was just like, yeah, you're pretty much the worst person in the world, and we understand why everybody really hated you for different reasons. It's where you get to the hatred of Smurf, ultimately, because she just wouldn't stop. Like, she just, like, wouldn't, there was an implication that Julia had come back for a while, like the last time you see her when she's heavily pregnant, and she comes back, and they're talking about taking her to rehab. They say that they'd done it before and that she'd been back before, and they imply that she'd had some chances, but in the very last time we see her, they act like they're going to go to rehab. She's very heavily pregnant, and Smurf drops her off under an overpass with other homeless people and pulls a gun on her and says, get the fuck out of the car, don't come back. And it was a no way out situation for Pope there too, because she's telling him, come with me, and it's like, come with you to what? Like, I can't come with you, and I can't save you in this situation. So he ends up back with Smurf, and then that was the thing that, like, kind of messed him up the worst, because obviously we find out he no one really cared about him growing up. He didn't have anybody of his own. He didn't have anything of his own, and he didn't really start straightening out until he started skating again. That was his one thing that was just his and his alone. That's why he was trying to tend toward religion, because he was just looking for something outside of this fucked up group of people. So he got to, when we see him starting to succeed at the end, when everything starts to fall apart. And everything falls apart because it was Smurf's empire. We see the beginning of it and we see the end of it. It was hers. They couldn't manage it. She knew they couldn't manage it. She tried to set them up. They messed that up. And she knew not one of them could handle what she had built and deal with it. And they couldn't, ultimately. They had no allegiances. They had no nobody to work with. Nobody respected them. And after she was gone. So when they ended up trying to run things on their own, the jobs got more and more reckless, and worse ideas, like really bad ideas, started happening, and nobody to tell them no. Like, she used to, like, get up on them too, like, you didn't run this past me, and now I'm going to punish you forever. So when they finally got to the jewelry heist at the rich the internet guy's place, it was a really, like, that was just outrageous. Like, everybody was just all over the place when they did the heist and the skateboarding thing, and they involved Ren in it. That was a mess. Like, it was very clear that they could not handle doing jobs, and Jay was trying to get out of doing jobs and pretending like he was going to pull them in on it, and get into the bigger real estate deals and stuff, but that was all a lie as well. But she knew that they couldn't manage it, and there was no leadership, and it just got completely out of control. But so it really spiraled, and we see it spiral bit by bit anyways, until we get to the end, the pretty much inevitable conclusion. And the ending, I know when I watch things, I have to watch them, I just do this naturally, but I'll watch it as a fan. I'm enjoying it, but I will also watch it as, like, from a critical place, a storytelling place, because that's what I do. So I kind of like to evaluate. I like to learn new things. I like to learn techniques. So I like to think about how I feel, but I also like to critically analyze what's going on in certain things. So for the ending for me, the very ending for me, as a fan, was devastating, but as watching from a critical point of view, was perfect. And the longer I thought about it, the more I liked it, because the story's over. The story ended. You know, we saw the beginning and we saw the end, and it ended. And because I think you kind of, as time goes on, you realize who these people are and why you like them for different reasons and why you don't like them from different reasons. But you do find out about Craig that he's not really like the other ones. He's really like an emotional person. He's a worrier. He kind of just is like somebody love me type of a thing. Gets in, you know, bad situations. You feel bad for him. You know, he's got a baby who gets held away from him quite a bit, and you know, because of all his bullshit with Ren, it was bad for him also. So you feel kind of like more, I think, emotionally connected to him than you do the other characters, even though the others go through things too. But I think that he's got that Haas quality about him. Like, you know, you just feel feel a little more towards him. And I think that the very ending, we really see it in a good way, draw from like The Wire and The Outsiders, you know, some really classic, you know, things going on. And it also comes by surprise. Like, when when he gets killed in the convenience store in a botched robbery, basically, it's like when Baz got killed, like, you don't necessarily realize they're not going to make it. And it's not till later, because I thought the whole time like Darren was going to be the one that ended up killed, because they soft killed him 3 times. You know, he was shot in the chest like 3 times over the course of the show. So I thought that they were kind of, the other shows would have done that. You know, they wouldn't have taken out the favorite. They wouldn't have dared. So I thought that's where that was headed. Like, he was going to end up being the one. And the plan to escape and the plan to break Pope out of jail, that was like the worst plan of them all. The plans kept getting worse, more reckless, more untenable, more no way out. And then we finally do end up in a no way out situation where if he stayed in jail, he was going to get killed no matter what. They were still, in the bus crash, the guy he was with was still trying to kill him up till the very end. So, and it was so crazy. He like ran home when he got back to the house. But the plans got more reckless. It was all and the last episode's called Fubar, and that's exactly what it was. And it was so sad and so emotional when they were pinned down in that house, and he gets them to leave on the bike. Andrew gets Craig and Darren to leave on the bike when they're getting pinned down by the cops, and they hug each other, and they kind of all know this is not gonna work. And you know it's not gonna work, but you just really hope it does from like the fan point of view. And then when they get to the convenience store and Craig gets shot and they're driving and he's losing all that blood and he says he's not gonna make it. My God. And then they pull over to the ocean. Like, and that's so evocative, right? Like, this is like something like they'd spent their whole life in the ocean. They did a paddle out for Baz in the ocean. Like, this is like the moment, right? And like when they have that moment there together, like, that was so good. That was like staged so well. Like, and that Darren just had to leave. He had to leave his body, you know, like he couldn't take him. He was freaking out, thinking he could take him over the border to Tijuana and get fixed up like he'd done before. But he was just, there was no way. There was no rationalization there. Like, and then that's what it really was. Like, and you see this team broken up, and it really, again, back to the Bonanza illusion. They really were like the Haas and Joe relationship, where like they were super close to each other. They'd fight, but they were super close to each other. They were their number one allies in life. And they just ultimately, it was just blow by blow, so devastating. And I'm not really like a big crier or somebody who gets like super upset. Like, there have been moments, you know, in my life when I have, but I kind of just mildly cried a little bit because I really didn't want to miss anything because I was being so emotional. But like the next day, I like had one of those days where I had to I just sat alone listening to sad music and watching out the window, silently crying for like a day. It took me like an entire day to get over it, because it was, if I could keep time in a bottle. Like, I just was so fucked up over it. And I couldn't think of another time when I was really that badly fucked up, because I have been, like, you know, sometimes it takes you a minute to take it in, and that was from the fan point of view. But the critical point of view, it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And again, so Shakespearean and so perfect. And then that got, you know, I like to think just a little sooner. I like to think that he died with diamonds in his pocket. You know, I know that doesn't mean anything, but I like to think that. And then again, if they'd have made it out and they'd have got to where Rin was and where Adrian was there too, if they'd have got to resettle themselves, I guess in Indonesia, she ultimately would have done something that would have got him killed eventually. Like, they were already on that collision course. They were showing that she did not care. Like, she would get him into fights and the robberies, and like she would have got him killed. She would have got him killed, clearly. But I mean, it's whatever, but we see him get killed. So that's the thing. And it's like, to take away the one that was like the nicest one, like that was such a smart, it really was the nicest one, such a smart thing to do, because it's not like messing with you emotionally, grabbing it, messing with you for no reason. It was really realistic, because the way that it all happened, where it was like they were frightened, people in the convenience store were frightened, and he was shot by a kid, and then and Darren was so panicked he was gonna shoot the kid, and he was like, don't do it, don't do it. That's so Craig. Like, that was so how it was. And that was exactly like how Omar went out in The Wire, almost exactly. And this whole thing, like, it was just absolutely devastating. But it led to an ending that I think maybe is one of the best endings of anything I've ever seen, because a lot of shows go and okay, we're over now, kind of like there's nowhere to go. Like, they've messed up, they got to reckon for all the shit they messed up all along the way, and this show never did that. There was no big plot holes, no big mistakes, no like hanging storylines, nothing like that. So we get to the end, and this is what I really love about it. And I still never got to cover a lot of the extraneous characters. Like, I absolutely love Dennis Leary in this. I've always been a fan of his. I thought he was a great fit, and I wish he kind of would have got more screen time as Darren's dad. Perfect fit, perfect. And the way that he treated him and stuff like that, I loved it. Again, there was like no bad machismo in this. Like, he could not care less that Darren was gay. He did not care at all, and that was so great to see. And I also liked about Darren being gay, we got to see a version of the gay storyline that wasn't like the out and proud gay storyline, like, character. Like, there's obviously nothing wrong with that, but that seems to kind of dominate the storylines of things. Like, the out and proud archetype is always, or the reluctantly becomes the out and proud type of a thing. Like, that's fine for what it is, but we rarely ever get to see a character who's just a guy that's gay. It's not like the first or even the third thing about their personality. Like, like, it's not just about being like super masculine and also gay. It was just about how, like, it was really contextually done, and nobody had a problem with it. Everybody was fine with it. It was so natural to not have it stand out in any kind of way, that it was just part of things. And that's what made these characters so, 360 degree. They were so great. But what I really loved thinking about, and have been thinking about pretty much since I finished the show, and more things come to mind all the time, but this I think is the best thing, and why I hope they never spin it off or try to do a sequel or anything like this, because the best thing that they could do is just leave it exactly where it is, because we know all the bad shit that happened, and the last thing we see is Jay in Indonesia or some tropical location, just sitting alone. And then it blacks out, and that's it. And you think, like, it takes some thought to kind of think what the implications of that are, because you think, oh, you bastard, you got away with it. Like, that's sort of the knee-jerk reaction. But that's not at all what happened. That's not at all what happened. What you see, him sitting there alone, and the whole show, what happens in the end cycles back to the beginning. The botched robbery, jewelry robbery, a cop gets shot, the cops get shot at that house. Craig gets shot in the beginning, and he get, and Darren is super emotional about the botched job, and super emotional about the death. Then we see in the first thing we see is Jay sitting alone, and his mom is next to his dead mom, and then sitting next to Penny, and sitting alone again. And, there's so many things that cycle right back to the beginning and tell a 360 degree story, like a perfect story about, like, wrap it up in a bow type of a thing. Nothing's left over. Everything's been addressed. So the thing that I think I love the most about that ending is sort of like, it's like other shows would have done it way differently, stupidly, but there was nowhere to go. He did not succeed. He took all the money, but that's all that he had. Because if you think about this, and another little side note, when Andrew sets the house on fire, Like the whole time I'd sort of been like, no, save the house. You can't let Pamela have the house. She's trying to change it. No, that's your house. You've always lived in this house. The house, the house, the house. But then by the end you realize that house has to die. That house is evil. It has to go. So when he sets it on fire, you didn't realize it till the end, but it has to go. But what's super cool about that is the ending is so loaded. It's not just Jay sitting there. What it is we are seeing a scared and hunted man. He did not succeed. He actually completely failed. All he got away with was some money. But because the house was in a neighborhood, it wasn't going to get to burn for very long before the fire department got there, put the fire out. So this is basically what we're dealing with. Like the implications of what happens afterwards, right? Like if it was a real scenario, blah, blah, blah. It stuck to kind of realness. And that was another cool thing. There was no fantasy or anything to hide behind. It was very realistic. So we can assume as he's sitting there, just sitting there alone, that he's read the news. Like he's looked up the news of Oceanside and saw what happened. So he knows the house got set on fire. He knows the Craig is dead. So he knows because he intended for them to get killed or caught by what he did when he made that 911 call and ratted them out, and then he punctured all the tires on their getaway cars. He was setting them up. I don't know if he was setting them up to be killed necessarily, but can you really put it past him? So we assume that he can know what happened, but because there were murders involved already, and potentially like wire fraud, like money, that's going to bring the FBI into the situation immediately. And where Andrew died by the pool and Penny died, they were really far removed away from the actual burning house, so their bodies would have remained completely intact. So when the investigators come in and look at this, they see first of all, they see someone who maybe it looks like Andrew did the killing, but he didn't, because they're going to find out right away that it's Jay's DNA and fingerprints that are all over Penny's body, right? And her glass. And he got really sloppy towards the end. And that busted up cell phone, burner phone, is in the trash can. And the vials of medicine he used to overdose her, as well as the syringes, those are just in the trash can in the sink, around somewhere. And the fire wouldn't have damaged them to the point that they would have been able to see them that much, or not been able to find them. So they're going to find his fingerprints all over that stuff. They're going to get her tox report and find out that matches, that she had gotten that, and that it was also in her drink with his fingerprints on it. And then he cried all over her, and they'd been together, so there's fingerprints and his DNA, and whereas none of Pope's anything is on her. So they're going to find out immediately that Jay killed her. And then they're going to start walking it back, and they can easily find out that he killed all the other people that he killed very, very easily. So now he's a wanted serial killer. He would be considered a serial killer. And so even though he went to a place with no extradition, that's like the best part, because they would figure it out immediately. And aside from that happening, so he's going to have, for the rest of his life, probably brief life, he's going to have the FBI on his ass, trying to figure out some way to catch him, to get him to a place of extradition, to kidnap him and move him over the border. He's going to be like literally on the most wanted list, the FBI most wanted list. Like, it would happen. So he's got that on one side. Plus also, and don't forget Billy. Billy hated Jay. And so, and there was, people like Billy and Jake and Frankie and Gia and the Trujillos, and even Nikki and her father can all attest that was Jay's voice on the 911 recording, and back it up to him setting everybody up, and realize that it was his plan all along to steal all this money. So, not that it's illegal to steal from other criminals, but they could see what he had done. So, and all these people also would ultimately find out, who didn't have a problem or were friends of Craig's, that he killed him, caused him to get killed. So they're going to want vengeance. But what's even more important is when he gets away from, he gets away clean because nothing had been figured out yet. But we also basically kind of have to assume that Darren managed. He got over the border. They were just going to go over on foot because they didn't have any of their resources. So let's say Darren gets to where Adrian and Ren are. And those two together, and to a lesser extent, Adrian, and an even lesser extent, Nick, the baby, but Craig had all these allies and people who loved him. And he has now got some of the most dangerous, angry people in the world after him. So he's got the FBI on one side, his Ren and Darren on the other side, and all of the people, like I said before, who had been friends of Craig's, who would work together, any way that they could to find him and track him down. So we can assume that he knows this. He's smart. He knows this. He's smart. So what's ultimately going to happen is the best thing that they could have done is just leaving it, just leaving it alone, and letting us think about that. Like that when we see him sitting there, it's such a loaded scene. We think like, oh, well, he's alone, too bad. But he's got his money and he can go about his life. He can never connect with another person and let anybody know who he was or what he's done. He can never really grow his money too much or people will notice. He knows that the FBI is going to be after him in a matter of days, if not weeks, if not days. He knows Darren and Ren are going to come after him. And again, to a lesser extent, the others like Adrian and generationally Nick could come after him. But like, the others that were all criminal masterminds in their own right, basically. And Billy is super, super pissed because he hates him anyways. And in the end, he was begging Darren to come with him. Like, don't do this prison break shit. Like, don't do it. So you've got all these really capable, really angry, really deadly people that are going to come after him. So him just sitting there and then it just goes to black. It was just like such a smart thing. And I hope that they never see fit to like do any kind of sequels or spin-offs or anything, because I just want to see the story close because it was just so perfectly done. And we cycle back, like this is the fact that the botched job and Jay is alone and the cops getting killed and all these things. So it really just tied everything up super neatly. And I absolutely loved it. And, it's 10 out of 10 for me. Like this is, I think, a new era of storytelling and of shows, and I wish people knew about it more. So I hope that anybody who stuck around and watched this whole thing or checks out the video later, and if you kind of got the wheels turning in your mind about how you felt about it as well, and how it was so cool that the quality never dropped, that it was so tight and there was no holes in it and very little mistakes. Like I think there was only one tiny mistake that I noticed. Well, a couple of tiny mistakes. One was they would text with gloves on. And or they would pretend to be like city workers in $300 sunglasses. And the woman that he helped out sent him a postcard. Andrew helped with her son get away, sent him a postcard to the help. It was blank, like she wouldn't know his address. So they're just tiny little bitty things like that. But it's so thrilling and it's so edge of the seat, and it's so, reels you in and you never know what's going to happen. And so I hope that, if you watched this and you liked it, even though I've gone on way more longer than I really intended to, but there's a lot to be said, and, help, recommend it to your friends, get people into it, because, the people who wrote this show and the people who started this show, worked on this show, I hope that this leads to a lot more opportunities. Like, obviously, like, Sean Hatatsi, which I think that's how you say his last name. I looked it up. I think it's Hatatsi. I'm not sure, but that's what the pronunciation said. So if I get it wrong, sorry. But it's a weird name. And I got weird names, too, so I get it. But I've been watching him, like, pretty much since, like, the first thing he was ever in. But the others were new to me. And I hope to see them get a lot of really good roles and go forward. And I hope to see the people that wrote on this, the same thing. I want to see more shows like this. I want to see this, if the umbrella style that I talked about is a real thing, I want to see that more. I want to see full featured stories. I want to see 360-degree stories. I don't want to just keep going, coasting by with, yeah, that was pretty good. Yeah, that was fine. Yeah, it was whatever. I want more 10 out of 10s. This sets a high bar. So recommend it to your friends, your coworkers who are not peenweens and can take it. It's really something that should be seen, and I wish that I would have known about it while it was airing, and I wish more people would have known about it in general, because I really feel like it was just really under the radar. And those are usually the best things. The really high volume super fan things usually suck. So Then I'm gonna draw it off there and let things go. I think I've talked enough, but thank you for watching. If you watched in pieces or however you did, get people into it. If you want to just continue the conversation, you can always do me some comments and stuff. I know I said some mean things about the Bonanza characters, but I was talking archetypes, and it's my favorite show, and I'm going to talk more about them in nice ways too in future episodes. But that's pretty much where I will leave you for this event. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed Animal Kingdom as much as I did, and I hope that you're looking forward to and can help help insist on by what we watch and what we rate, getting more high quality shows and programs out there. So bye.